Howdy howdy, my name is John, and this video is my September 2020 wrap-up and October 2020 TBR. If you've been watching my weekly update videos, I'll provide a timestamp in the description below to where you can skip to the books that I read this week. The first book I finished was The Land of Painted Caves by Jean M. Auel. This is the sixth and final book in the Earth Children series. I wasn't sure that this was the right choice to start my channel with as far as reading a series, but I really enjoyed this series. This series follows a young woman in prehistoric Ice Age Europe. For the most part, I found the relationships that she forms over the years fascinating. This series definitely does have its weaknesses. One of those weaknesses being that she does tend to info dump a lot. But I do highly recommend that you pick up this series and give it a try. The first novel in the series is The Clan of the Cave Bear. I have a spoiler-free review for the entire series, and I'll link it in the description below. I gave The Land of Painted Caves 4 stars. The biggest reason I gave this novel 4 stars is because at the beginning, the novel gets a bit repetitive, and it will be hard for some readers to kind of push through the beginning of the novel. Toward the end, the action kind of picks up, and it becomes a much more interesting novel. The next book I finished is Tahanu. This is the 4th book, and despite the title on the book, it is not the last book in Earthsea. There are 2 more that follow it. I did not like this book very much. I only gave it 1 star. Now, at the beginning, the first half of the book, it was kind of a 3-star novel for me. I also gave the 2nd book and the 3rd book of this series 3 stars because I've been having trouble relating to the main characters in these novels, and it's true of this novel. Toward the end of the novel, the main character started to get on my nerves, and then the ending of this novel I really found unsatisfying. That's why it dropped all the way to a 1-star rating for me. The next book I finished was Traitor's Blade by Sebastian de Castell. This is the 1st book in the Greatcoat series. Mike, from Mike's Book Reviews, is doing a read-along on his channel. The read-along started back in August, and I didn't really decide to pick this series up until I watched a couple of reviews, one by Alan from Alexandria, the other from Margaret Slowly Read. Between the 2 of them, they convinced me to give this series a go. I really enjoyed this novel. There are some darker moments in it, but for the most part, the fight scenes are really well done. There's a lot of witty banter between the 3 main characters. The next book I finished is Kilobyte by Piers Anthony. Being the Piers Anthony fan that I am, I've decided that I'm going to start reading 1 Piers Anthony book a month. This is a standalone novel, and it revolves around a virtual reality game called Kilobyte. It was written back in 1993. It's really interesting to see how the online gaming community has evolved since this novel was written, and kind of compare to see how this novel predicted it would evolve and how it actually evolved. I've done a review for this novel, and Dwayne from Flipping Pages compared it to Ready Player One. I actually watched Ready Player One last night, and for someone my age, that movie was a lot of fun with all of the pop culture references that get thrown in there. I missed a bunch of them, but my favorite is in the very beginning race in that movie. There's a blink and you'll miss it shot of the Silver Cup Studios, and of course that is where the final fight scene took place in the Highlander movie, which is one of my favorites. I gave this novel 4 stars. This novel would serve as a good introduction to Piers Anthony if you've never read him before. As I said, it's a standalone, so you're not really investing in a huge series like Xanth if you want to give Piers Anthony a try. It showcases kind of his humor and his writing style, and I highly encourage you to give it a try. It's not his best work, but it's still enjoyable. The next book I finished was Night Shadow by Sebastian de Castell. This is the second book in the Greatcoat series. Reading this novel got me caught up with the read-along on Mike's Books Reviews channel. I enjoyed this book as well. The witty banter is still there. This book does take a much darker tone than the first novel does. And there are probably some scenes that some readers are going to struggle to get through. I gave this novel 4 stars, and the biggest reason I did not enjoy it quite as much as I did the first one is because this novel does a great job of keeping you guessing what's going on. The problem that I had is that by the time everything gets revealed, there's a lot of, would that really have happened? And it took me out of the story just enough to where I downgraded it from 5 stars to 4. But still, I'm really looking forward to reading the third one in this series. Next, I read 2 short stories that are available on Tor.com, and they were recommended to me by Amanda from Book Apple Tree, and I'll provide a link to both her video and the short stories in the description below. The first one is For He Can Creep, and it's by Siobhan Carroll. This follows the story of a cat who belongs to a poet who is in an insane asylum. This story is based off of a real poet, and he wrote poetry about his cat. And the title of this short story is actually one of the stanzas from his poem. The cat in this story makes a deal with the devil and finds out that it was more than he bargained for. I think 2 types of people will really enjoy this story. Number 1, if you like cats, you'll definitely enjoy this story. 2, if you grew up attending church, you're going to find a lot of the references funny in this short story. According to Goodreads, if it were an ebook, it's about 30 pages long, so it's not very long. It takes maybe half an hour to an hour to read, and I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. The next short story is I, Cthulhu, or What a Tentacle-Faced Creature Like Me is Doing in a Sunken City Like This, or something like that. And it's by Neil Gaiman. It's very short. If it were an ebook, it'd only be about 12 pages, so it's a really quick read. This was my first experience reading Neil Gaiman. There's definitely humor in this, and I'm sure I would get the humor a lot more if I were more familiar with the Cthulhu story by H.P. Lovecraft, but I still enjoyed it. I gave it 3 stars. The next book I finished was Tales from Earthsea by Ursula K. Guin. This is the 5th book in the Earthsea series. I really wasn't sure if I was going to continue with this series after reading Tahanu, but I'm actually kind of glad that I decided to pick this book up and give it a try. This book is a collection of short stories. It should be read in order because these short stories build on the 4 stories before it, and it sets up the next book. 5 short stories, and then the final section is kind of a history and description of the geography of the area. I'm going to go into the stories more in detail in my review of the book. Overall, I gave this book 3 stars. I had a couple of days left in the month, so I wanted to pick up a short book to finish the month out on. One of the books that I picked up was Animal Farm by George Orwell. I've never read this book before. I had read 1984 back when I was in high school. This book blew me away. This is definitely a 5-star read. The book is basically a criticism of both capitalism and communism. It was written in 1943 while Britain and the Soviet Union were allies fighting off Nazi Germany. This book actually works well as a story just by itself. It's entertaining, but it also is effective criticism. What really struck me about this book is how relevant this is to 2020. This is definitely a 5-star read, and I recommend that you pick it up and give it a try. Very short. It took me an afternoon and an evening to get through it. Because Animal Farm was such a quick read, I then decided to pick up Prosper's Demon by K.J. Parker. Again, this is another short book. It's a novella. This book follows a main character who is an exorcist. He encounters a man named Prosper who is possessed by a demon. Prosper is a widely known artist and engineer, and the book kind of follows their adventures. This novel it's good, but not quite a 4-star novel until the end, and then the end elevated it to a 4-star novel. I'm going to do a review on this book, and I'll talk a little bit more about it in the review. I'm doing a buddy read with a real-life friend of mine of Time of the Twins. This is the first book in the Dragonlance Legends trilogy, which followed the Dragonlance Chronicles trilogy. I'm really enjoying this book. We're reading a chapter a day, and then we're discussing the chapter at the end of the day. Okay, now to my October TBR. I'm still continuing reading Time of the Twins, and I do expect to finish this book by the end of the month, at which point I anticipate my friend and I will continue with War of the Twins. The first book I plan on reading in October is The Other Wind by Ursula K. This is the 6th and final book of the Earthsea series. I'm actually about halfway through this novel, and this novel follows a middle-aged man. And for some reason, I'm finding this novel a little bit more enjoyable than I have the previous novels. Not really sure why. The next book I plan on reading is Saint's Blood by Sebastian de Castell. This is the 3rd book in the Greatcoat series. Again, Mike is doing a read-along on his channel. The next book I'm planning on reading is Split Infinity by Piers Anthony. Again, I'm planning on reading a Piers Anthony book a month. This is the first book in the Apprentice Adept series, which is a 7-book series. Next, I'm planning on reading Moneyball by Michael Lewis. I intend on reading one nonfiction book a month, or at least have a nonfiction book ongoing. I didn't do that last month because I wasn't sure how the buddy read was going to work out, but October seems like a good time to pick up a book about baseball. Of course, this was made into a movie several years back. I haven't seen the movie. I haven't read the book. I may watch the movie after I read the book and kind of compare the two. The next series of books I'm reading, because it's October, which is, of course, the month Halloween comes on. I'd kind of already picked out my TBR for the month, and then I watched a video by Erica from Tome Travelers. She created Halloween-a-thon. The books that I had already selected fit a lot of the prompts that she had created. I found these prompts to be really creative, and I encourage you to check out her video. The link is in the description below. And I'm only going to tell you which of the prompts fit the books that I selected. The first book is Tales for the Midnight Hour by J.B. Stamper. This is a book I actually got when I was a kid. There's a date stamped in it from May 1983. Now, if this book scares me too much, I may just abandon the rest of my spooky reads. One of the prompts of the read-along is Trick or Treat. The trick is books that you're scared to read. Treat is to reread a book. Of course, I've obviously read this book several times. It's just been a while. The next book is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I'm going to use this book to fill several of the prompts. The first prompt is cult classic, or read a book that is a classic in the horror genre. This is probably the classic. The next prompt is let's do the time warp again, or read a book that became a movie. Of course, this has been done as a movie many times. The next prompt is creature of the night, or read a book that has your favorite Halloween monster or creature. I don't really have a favorite Halloween creature or monster, so I'm going to cheat and use this book for that prompt. The last prompt I'm going to use is Orange is the New Black. That is to read a book whose cover is either orange or black. This cover has both orange and black on it. If you've seen my book haul video, you know I got this book by accident. I had ordered a different book and they sent me this book instead. However, it does fill one of the prompts because it's thriller, or read a book that is a thriller. This next book is Gothic Fantasies, American Gothic Short Stories, and it's a collection of short stories by various authors. Some of the short stories are classics. There's some in here by Edgar Allan Poe and H.P. Lovecraft, and a lot of the short stories are original publications. I'm using this book for two prompts. Again, I'm going to use it for the Orange is the New Black because this cover is mostly black. But I'm also going to use it for the I Want to Suck Your Blood prompt, which is to read a book by an author who won a Bram Stoker Award. One of the short stories is written by Lucy Snyder, who won a Bram Stoker Award for one of the short stories she wrote. Not the short story that's in this book, but still I'm going to use it for that prompt. The last book on my TBR is Nightmares and Dreamscapes by Stephen King. This, again, is a collection of short stories, and it fills the prompt, King Me, or read a book by Stephen King. Stephen King also has won a number of Bram Stoker Awards, and I'm assuming that he is disqualified from the Bram Stoker Award prompt. This book was nominated for a Bram Stoker Award but did not win. I've had a really good September and I'm looking forward to a good October. I really appreciate every one of you that have watched one of my videos over the past month, and I hope you have a good reading month in October. Thank you for watching this video, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.